Hi, everyone. Well, this is the review session for exam number 2. Number of general reminders. The exam is going to be open for you to take next week from October 27 until October 29. Again, the window lasts for 72 hours. And within that period of 3 days, you have to find a couple of hours to sit down, start and submit and complete and submit the exam. Exam 2 covers the material, only material from our second unit, which includes weeks 7, 8, and 9. The topic are international organizations, international governance, and international law, a little bit about globalization. All the materials from all those weeks, week 7, 8, and 9, is valid and fair game in this exam. There are a couple of chapters or about 2.5 chapters to read, some other things to reviews, mini lectures, audio files. Of course, make sure that you review the discussion forums, number 5 and number 6. I know in number 5 there's a lot of good and relevant information in there, in the interactions, in my feedback, in feedback from other students. And I assume the same will go for forum number 6, although we're just working on it right now. So far nobody has shown up for this session, but as I said before, I'll still be running it. I'm going to share a slideshow with some comments about things that you should know before, or items that you should review and know before the exam. And so I encourage everybody to stay in and look throughout this slideshow. If students would log in during these sessions, you'll see that I will be interacting with them. In addition, I'm going to hold, and I suggest that you review this session as part of your preparation for the exam. And then on next week, on Monday, I will hold a questions and answers session. And that session, if nobody's going to show up, I won't hold it. I'm providing information now, but I'm hoping to be able to answer your questions on Monday. And so just so you know, that session will be running. Hopefully some of you will log in. If they will, and there will be questions and some discussion, I will record and post it as well. If you don't see a post of that recording, that means that just nobody showed up, and I guess you're all ready and prepared for the exam. If it's a matter of timing, if you have questions but can't show up to the Q&A session, email me. We can either set up another time, or we can, or I can just answer your questions by email. Hi, Connor. I was just, I'm recording this session, even though at this point you're the only one around. What I'll do today is just review some items that I think are important to know before the exam. And then if anybody else will join in, and if you guys have questions, I will take them now. If not, I can take questions later on in the week, either by email or during the session on Monday. For anybody who is here, I'm gonna share a screen. So I can see you, but if you have a question, either pop it in the chat or just unmute yourself and speak up. Okay. So let me share my screen. Here we are. Wait. Okay. All right. So the topic, or the general topic of the exam, is global governance, or more specifically, we're talking also about international organizations and international law. The first thing that I think we should talk about is the difference between governance and government. And there is a quote here from James Rosenau, who says, governance and government both refer to purposes, behavior, to system of rule, but government suggests activities that are backed by formal authority, by police power to ensure the implementation, whereas governance refer to activities backed by shared goals that may or may not derive from legal and formally prescribed responsibilities. Governance is more encompassing. It embraces governmental institution, but it also subsumes informal, non-governmental mechanism. This distinction is very important to know when we talk about international or world governance, because what we have is some governance, some institutions, some organizations, some structures. What we don't have is a government. We do not have a world government, right? Few points about global governance. A lot of times we look at the international organizations when we talk about world or global governance, IOs, international organizations. It can be through IOs, but it can be just more loose, such as in other institutions. We'll talk about it in a minute. But none of that, but there is no hierarchy, right? Remember, we are still in a self-help, anarchic international system. There is still no hierarchy. We have some mechanism for coordinating action and for cooperating over some items, but we haven't changed the system, right? The international system is still anarchic and still have self-help conditions in it. And this is one of the main differences between liberalism and realism. Realism see international organizations as self-help tools. Sometimes nation states, in their self-interested pursuit of their goals, find it convenient to use governance mechanisms such as international organizations. But liberalism believe that as we get used to these tools of governance, that they can become independent entities and change slowly and gradually, start to change the system towards something that resembles more of a government. And that's a big, it's a very big difference, because if you're a realist and you just see those international organizations as a tool, then you use them where it's convenient for you and you ignore them when it's not. Look at the United States in 1991. We engaged in the first Gulf War against Iraq to liberate Kuwait, and that was under the mandate of the United Nations. And the United States fully engaged in that operation, was fully part of it, contributed a lot of troops, a lot of know-how. But in 2003, where the United States wanted an international mandate to invade Iraq, but the international community didn't agree that that was necessary, the UN Security Council did not decide to invade Iraq in 2003, then the United States just said, okay, then we're going to act unilaterally. That's a very realist point of view We're not giving the institution, the UN Security Council in this case, we're not giving it um, any respect or any independent power. We're just using it when it's convenient for us and ignoring it when it's not. One question is why should we even have international governance? And the answer is kind of straightforward here, right? We have global problems. We have problems that transcend borders. Think about the global environment, water pollution, air pollution, management of borders. All of those things are problems and issues that transcend borders, and therefore they require some kind of cooperation for the solution. That cooperation can be regional or sometimes it can be global. Now, the more actors we have, the more nation states we have or other interested entities, um, the more complex that becomes, and we need even more coordination between all of those um, bodies. This is also where we need to think about public goods. Public goods are not specific to international politics. It's an economic and political concept that is that we can talk about in the domestic context, local context, but also in the international environment. Public goods are those things that are joint, meaning that consumption by one does not reduce the availability of that thing for others. And they're also non-exclusive. We can't say, oh, you're not going to use that. Okay? Think about the air that we are breathing. It is a public good because when I breathe, you can still breathe, and I cannot exclude you from breathing, right? Um, Public roads, public parks, those are good examples for that. The roads that we are driving our cars on are public goods. They're joint and they are non-exclusive, right? But with that idea of public goods also comes a potential for free riding. Because when we have a public good, such as the air that we are breathing, um, because it is joint and non-exclusive, some people can say, well, but I want to have a factory that pollute that air. And I will, um, and I will do whatever I want because I'm pursuing my own interest here. But at the same time, I am not contributing into the global effort to keep clean air all around the world or specifically in my region, right? Um, this is also true about every other public good. We have the risk of free riding. And so because of the risk of free riding and because of the need for public goods, we need to have some sort of a management or a governance system to help us coordinate the action and avoid free riding as much as possible. Another reason and another answer of how we get international organizations or international governance mechanism is this idea, this theory of functionalism. And here, very, very simply, the answer for why do we get international organizations has to do with we create them when we need them. When there is a need for international cooperation and coordination, we will create an international organization. If you look at the the first three international organizations, the Central Commission for the Navigation on the Rhine from 1816, the International Telegraph Union from 1865, and the Universal Postal Union from 1874, they all came up to solve or to address very specific issues, right? We needed to make sure that boats can navigate and ride safely on the Rhine River. And so the countries surrounding that river created this commission, which then became an international organization that made the rules about that specific issue, just for a function, for a specific thing. Same goes with the Universal Postal Union and the Telegraph Union. We had a problem, we needed to create a coordination mechanism, and we did that, right? So we see if you follow functionalism, then you can very easily explain economic and social cooperation. There's a problem, there's a need to address it. We come up with, using technology or the technology of the time, um, and we come up with a set of rules how to govern or manage that issue. But the question is, can functional cooperation then spill into political issues and cultural differences? So if you look at the European Union, it started again with a very functional organization, the European Coal Commission, right, between 5 countries. But now we have a full-blown political organization or a union of 27 countries, right? So the question is, can we really have that process happen all around the world? The jury is still out, even for the European Union. It's done very well. It's economic cooperation, but every time it goes into issues of identity or political cooperation, we see a lot of problems. So types of international organizations, right? Uh, First of all, we have the intergovernmental organizations, or IGOs. In those organizations, the members are nation states or the governments or representatives of the governments of those nation states. And they reach usually to a number of countries and govern a number of issues, right? The funding of those organizations come from the member governments using some sort of a scheme that includes fees, quotas, or donations. We have global IGOs, some such as the United Nations and the World Trade Organization. We have regional IGOs such as the European Union or the Organization of American States, African Union, right? And then we have functional organization like OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Very specific. The only reason those countries are joined together in an organization is because they are exporting petroleum, right? The second type, generally speaking, of international organizations is non-governmental organizations, or NGOs. Here, the members are private individuals that are dedicated to a certain cause. The scope and the reach of those groups or those organizations most of the time is narrow, and for funding they rely on donations, either from corporations or from individuals. And here, we have many examples. Two of the very well-known ones are Greenpeace about the environment, and Amnesty International, which is a human rights NGO, global NGO. All right, the largest or the one big global international organization is the United Nations, the UN. But the UN, commonly people think about it as a world government. It is not. It is not a world government. it is still a coordination, an organization that comes to coordinate actions between nation states with the hope of promoting peace and security and human rights, right? In this slide over here, you can see um, the institutional chart or the structural chart of the United Nations. It is broken into 6 organs. The General Assembly, which is um, the plenary body that meets every year in September in New York. We have the International Court of Justice, which is a judicial institution that's related to the UN, but it can only hear disputes between countries, between countries, not between individuals and not between countries and individuals. We also have the Economic and Social Council, that has, if in the plenary session in the General Assembly, all 193 members are represented. In the Economic and Social Council, we have 54 members, each of them serving a 3-year term, and it's 1 vote per member. And this body has a lot of agencies that you probably heard about, like the World Health Organization and UNESCO, and the World Bank, and a whole other number of those agencies that are part of the UN. We had the Trusteeship Council, which was supposed to help territories coming from colonialization, sorry, coming out of colonialization and gaining independence. But since we don't have any more cases like that, that council has stopped its operations in 1994. We have the UN Secretariat, which is headed by the Secretary General, who is a manager of the United Nations. He's not a president. He doesn't have any decision. Well, that's not true. It's more of a CEO. It's like a CEO of a company, private company. And the Secretariat runs the day-to-day operation of the UN, from writing reports to managing to managing all the different agencies and the funding. And then finally, we have the UN Security Council, which is arguably the strongest of those 6 organs. It has 15 members, 5 permanent members: US, UK, China, France, and Russia. And it has 10 rotating. Just 1 second, please. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. So I was talking about the UN Security Council, 15 members, 5 permanent, 10 are rotating, or are on a rotating seat, and replace themselves every 2 years. The 5 permanent members have, they're not just permanent as they're always there, they also have a veto power. And while you need a majority, a 2/3 majority vote in the UN Security Council, such as that you need 9 to 5 vote. If one of the permanent members votes on the negative, the resolution falls. So this is where the veto power comes in. The UN Security Council also is the only body here that has the power to make binding resolutions and it has tools. It can apply, decide on applying sanctions, economic or diplomatic sanctions, and even to deploy peacekeeping missions or even peace enforcement operations. So deploying actual forces. So that is what the United Nations is and how it is combined, right? So like I said before, the UN is the mission of the UN is to promote peace and security, peace and stability in the world, and also to make sure that we respect human rights. The budget of the UN comes from quotas that are based on national wealth. So the richer countries pay more, or supposed to pay more, in dues. Um, Here, for example, the United States is paying about it changes, with our economic conditions, but we're supposed to pay about 22 to 23%, 21 to 23% of the UN budget comes from United States dues. There's a lot of criticisms about the United Nations. Um, some people say that the UN is too weak, especially on its main mission. If the main mission is to promote peace and security, peace and stability, but we still see conflict and war around the world, then um, something is wrong here. The organization is not fulfilling its goals. And there's a lot of moves for reforms, asking for more transparency in all the bodies of the UN, trying to reduce corruption all around, and specifically pointing at the Security Council and trying to reform it and change it, maybe get rid of the permanent seats, maybe get rid of the veto power, maybe enlarge the UN Security Council, and a number of other of those reform ideas. Now, some things that we should, some highlights of UN operations in the last 75 years include um, the UN is built on this idea of collective security, which we actually cover in the next unit when we are talking about war and peace and conflict. Um, but only once in its entire time it invoked the collective security article, and that was during the first Gulf War. The idea here was that one country, Iraq, aggressively took over another country, Kuwait, and then the entire international community come up to liberate um, Kuwait from Iraq. This was a truly international effort. There were about a million troops involved from about 103 countries, I believe. Many other countries contributed funds. Um, just so you have that point in your mind. In 1991, the United States sent hundreds of thousands of troops to the Gulf, but we paid a large $0 amount for it because the entire bill was paid by other countries, mainly by Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and other countries in the Gulf. If you look at the record of the UN and the UN Security Council, you see that there is a good track record of sanctions and condemnations of countries because of violations of peace and because of violations of human rights. But as I said in the previous slide, there's also a lot of criticism that this is not enough, that we still get a situation of Rwanda in 1994 where there is a huge massacre or a genocide, but the UN kind of literally UN peacekeepers had to stand and watch that, and the UN did not get more involved. Um, the UN and the UN Security Council tried to stand up to the superpower in 2003, and this was a test, right? I mean, if the UN, if the international organization is strong enough, then um, the United States should listen to it, should back up from the plan to invade Iraq. But there was no Security Council resolution authorizing the US action, even though the United States tried to get such a resolution. But still, the invasion happened, suggesting that, at least for the United States, the UN is more like a tool to use in this self-help system, rather than an independent entity that has its own respect, right? PKO's peacekeeping operations, we have some action until the end of the Cold War, and then we see an outburst of many um, peacekeeping operations, especially in Africa, and in the former Soviet Union context. That happens at the beginning of the 1990s. But then after events that happened in Somalia and in former Yugoslavia, we see the European countries, the United States and the UN as a whole kind of cool down and becomes much more cautious, think about 2 or 3 or 10 times before getting involved um, in other situations. We now live in a period where UN peacekeeping operations try to step to what will be their next generation, and to do more good around the world. All international in all intergovernmental organizations have utilized one of these voting formulas, such as majority voting, one country, one vote, and the more votes go to one side, very, very simple. Um, a super majority voting, here we still have one country, one vote, but we're asking for a 2/3 majority or a 3/4 majority, right? There's also unanimity voting. Some bodies like the General Assembly of the United States, or of the United Nations, prefer to make resolutions by unanimous consent, and so that's another option. And then finally, we have weighted voting systems that, based on how large a country is, how rich a country is, how powerful a country is, it gets unequal voting within the organization. If you look at the schemes in the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, those are kind of notorious to the fact that only um, only 16% of the countries involved have 84% of the votes because of the weighted voting system. We talk more about that again in the next unit when we talk about international political economy. Right. So before we go to international law, Connor, do you have any questions?
No, Professor. I think you answered all of them. Thank you.
Okay, great. So the second part, I mean, the second and related part of the material focuses on international law, right? And I think we have to start by asking, what is international law? And when we're talking about international law, it's definitely not the same as domestic law. And we sometimes make that mistake of taking whatever we know about law and legal studies and try to apply it one to one, it really wouldn't work in the international context. Still, we do have a body of international law. Um, those are, as the slide suggests, those are principal customs and rules that govern the interactions between um, actors in international politics, nation states, other international organizations, individuals, etc. Right? Um, those can be seen more as moral guidelines, right? Um, than an actual law like we have in the domestic sphere. And that's because we do not have a formal legislative. We don't have a legislative, a lawmaking process set up. We'll talk in a couple of minutes about how we make international treaties, but that's as far as it gets. We don't have, again, a legislative body that makes international law. And we also don't have the enforcement power or the judicial power to either to hold people, to hold countries accountable. There are some courts, some international courts. We talked about in the context of the UN about the International Court of Justice. I'll mention the International Criminal Court. There are some economic courts about trade, but they all have very limited capability. The strongest of these is probably the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and it still is very limited in its capabilities. Right, a few more points, general points about international law. Um, kind of any way you're gonna twist and turn it, the standard of international law rests on Western approaches to law, to the rights of individuals, to favoring, sorry about that, to favoring civil and political rights over economic and social rights, and to kind of obsessing over this idea of due process. These are all very much Western approaches, and they kind of ruled the day in international law. International law, the way that we have it right now, is based on the traditions of liberalism, certainly. Now, since I said before that we don't have a legislative body, but also we don't have, remember, this is still, we don't have a world government, we don't have a world police, we don't have an enforcement or a punishment body, then why should states, why should nation states comply with international law? And the answer has to do with the fact that, if you look at yourself, why most of us comply with most of the laws. Um, we do it because we do it, because most people, most of the time, don't break the law. We also have the incentives that are related to the fact that we do have a police and a court system and a punishment system, and there will be a price to pay if you violate the law. But most people, most of the time, just agree to the laws and the norms of the society that they live in, and that's how we behave. And the same goes when we go into international politics, right? So most nation states comply with international law because they are socialized to believe that those are the correct rules. Those are the rules of the system that we are existing in. So that's okay. Countries also worry about their reputation. If you have a reputation of somebody who don't respect the law, then you cannot expect other countries to extend um, any respect to you, or to always respect the law when it comes to dealing with you. And of course, generally speaking, to credibility. If I can trust you not to break international law more in general, then I probably can't trust you when we want to make a trade deal. And so it kind of pays to have good reputation, good credibility. And we nation states have been existing side by side for so many years, so they are socializing into accepting this system of international law. So I said that we don't have a legislative body, but how do we get international laws, right? So some part of it comes from international customs, uh, things that were always done in a certain way, and then later on they were codified as international law, right? The best example for that, I think, is the uh, distance of the territorial waters offshore for each country. So it used to be 3 nautical miles from the shoreline. And the reason is that at the time, this was the distance that most cannon could reach. So that the area that I can protect or expect to be able to protect is 3 nautical miles, right? So for many, many years, that was considered to be the extension of the territorial waters of each country. Nowadays, it is expanded into 12 nautical miles, and it's codified by the UN Law of the Sea. There's also an extended zone, an EEZ, an extended economic zone of 200 nautical miles, in which the country has the sole rights for extracting resources, even if it's fishing, or if there are any minerals in the grounds under the oceans. So international the custom is one. The other way, and this is where there is a process, and it's may look similar to a legislative body, but it's not there yet, is the creation of international treaties. The process of getting an international treaty has some steps on it, including negotiations, drafting, consultations with NGOs, with experts, with countries, with each other. Um, and then representatives of countries sign the treaty, but they also have to then go back to their home countries and ratify it, and then finally implement it in their countries, right? And so that's, you could see some sort of a legislative process here, but it is not step by step, and it's not extremely institutionalized. Nowadays, most treaties are being negotiated through the UN, but not all of them. Not not all such treaties. Um, in the United States, after we were involved in the negotiations and drafting and signing an international treaty, so the president has to sign it, but then we need a 2/3 majority in the US Senate to ratify it, and then obviously implement it, because once the United States ratifies an international treaty, it becomes, according to the Constitution, part of the Constitution. We make international treaties internationally through the process that I just discussed, but they are implemented nationally by each member country, meaning that once a country decided to sign and ratify an international treaty, it then has to change or make sure that its domestic laws go hand in hand with that international treaty. And so because of that, we also say that every time a country signs and ratifies an international treaty, it gives away a little bit of its sovereignty. Because now, over that specific area, if we're thinking about women's rights or rights of children, or um, uh, prohibition on torture, or we have many international treaties on that area, the ultimate authority is no longer with the national government, but it now rests with the international treaty, right? Things that are very different in an international treaty than in domestic laws is that member countries can write in reservations and exceptions in order to protect their domestic conduct. Think about it that you could go in and write some exception to your family on any given law, right? That's pretty much what this is it, what is happening here. Um, International treaties are only binding for those countries that sign and ratify them. They're not binding for countries who are not. So if we look at the big treaties such as the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which came in to stop the spread of nuclear weapons, we have some countries that according to the treaty should not have nuclear weapons, such as India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel. But honestly, they're not necessarily breaking international law because they are not party to the international treaty. And then a country can also withdraw from a treaty at any point. If we go back to the NPT, that's exactly what North Korea did. For many years, it was part of the NPT, and then it decided to develop nuclear weapons and just withdrew from the treaty. Right. Um, a large body of international law deals with humanitarian law. We have the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. We have the International Covenant on um, Economic and Social Rights. We have the Convention on the Rights of the Child. We have conventions against torture, against genocide, against a whole number of human rights issues. And now we even have a court that's supposed to uh, hold people accountable. Now, the International Criminal Court, the ICC, was came into power in 2001. It is based on the Rome Statute of 1998. Um, Before that, there were years of specific tribunals, such as the post-World War II tribunals, both in Germany and in Japan, that held individuals responsible for breaking what we believe are great moral codes, which are now part of international law. When we see more such tribunals happening time and time again, including after the Rwanda massacre, including in a number of other cases. But the international community has decided to build up an international criminal court that will be in charge globally on all such cases. So whenever there is such a gross violation of human rights, a violation of what we consider to be the core crimes of international law, then there is one single court that that can um, adjudicate those cases, right? The core crimes of international politics or international law are the crime of genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression. The crime of aggression is not very well defined, and so we don't see any trials or arbitration dealing with it. But the other three, certainly, we have some cases running in the ICC. Um, what's unique about the ICC is, unlike the International Court of Justice that can only kind of arbitrate cases between nation states, the ICC has jurisdiction over individuals. So it doesn't go after the country that conducted the genocide, but after the individual individuals who gave the commands or who were involved and decided on the genocidal act. And arguably because of that, um, it adds to deterrence, which is part of any punishment or any legal procedure, right? All right, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen because this is that's the end of the prepared comments that I had about the material covered in exam 2. Of course, if you've read and if you reviewed all the different items in weeks 7, 8, and 9, you know that there's a lot more to all of that. But I just wanted to kind of go over some highlights or some points that I thought were important as you study for the exam. Connor, any questions or anything that I didn't cover that you want me to discuss?
No, that was very helpful, Professor. I took a lot of good notes. I think that was very beneficial to be here today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, so before I stop the recording, I just remind everybody that that's going to be hopefully watching the recording, that the exam will be open on next week from October 27 to the 29. And that it covers again the unit 2, which is weeks 7, 8, and 9, talking about global governance, international organizations, and international law. And that on Monday I will have a question and answer session as well. All the details are scattered throughout the announcements. And if you have questions before that or after that, you're also welcome, of course, to email me. Or if there are a number of you who need me to set up another session to answer your questions, but just they can't attend because of the timing of these sessions, then also please let me know. So by that, I'm just gonna end the recording here.